The morning sun cast long shadows across the ancient stones of the Tower of London as Queen Camilla stepped out of her royal car. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and the distant sound of the Thames flowing nearby. Today marked a special occasion, the 500th anniversary of the Yeoman Warders, those iconic guards who had protected this historic fortress for centuries. Queen Camilla adjusted her navy blue coat and checked her watch. Everything had to be perfect. Today, the media was watching. Tourists had gathered from around the world, and this ceremony meant a great deal to the royal family's connection with British history. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, reviewing protocols and studying the significance of this milestone celebration. As she walked through the entrance gates, the Queen noticed something that immediately caught her attention. The guards seemed different today. Usually, when she arrived at any royal location, there was a certain energy, a buzz of activity as everyone prepared to receive her properly. But today, the atmosphere felt subdued, almost somber. Several yeoman warders stood near the White Tower, their famous red and gold uniforms looking magnificent as always. But instead of the usual alert posture she expected, they appeared to be standing quietly, almost lost in thought. Some had their heads slightly bowed. Others gazed into the distance with expressions she couldn't quite read. The Queen's eyes moved from one guard to another, taking note of their behavior. In her years of royal duties, she had developed a keen sense for reading situations and people. Something was definitely different here. These weren't the sharp, attentive guards she was accustomed to seeing during official visits. Her royal training kicked in almost automatically. Protocol was everything in the royal world. Every gesture, every moment of ceremony had meaning and importance. The way guards presented themselves wasn't just about respect. It was about maintaining the dignity and tradition that the British monarchy represented to millions of people around the world. Near the entrance to the Bloody Tower, she spotted more guards who seemed equally distracted. One was holding what appeared to be a wreath, another carried a small British flag, and a third held an old photograph in his hands. The Queen squinted slightly, trying to understand what was happening. Were they preparing for some part of the ceremony she hadn't been told about? The sounds around her seemed muted too. Usually, royal visits came with a certain level of orchestrated energy, staff members moving purposefully, last-minute preparations being made, photographers positioning themselves for the best shots. But today, even the tourists seemed to be speaking in hushed tones. Queen Camilla's personal secretary walked beside her, occasionally pointing out various aspects of the day's schedule, but the Queen found herself only half listening. Her attention remained focused on the guards and their unusual demeanor. In all her years of royal duties, she had never encountered such a relaxed, or was it unprepared, group of guards during an official ceremony. As they approached the main ceremonial area, the Queen could see that everything else appeared to be in order. The red carpet was perfectly positioned, the speaking platform looked ready, and the ceremonial decorations were beautifully arranged. Tables displayed historical artifacts, and information boards told the story of the yeoman warders through the centuries. Everything looked exactly as it should for such an important anniversary celebration. But the guards themselves continued to puzzle her. She watched as one of them wiped his eye with the back of his hand, while another seemed to be whispering something to his colleague. This wasn't the sharp military precision she expected from the Tower of London's famous protectors. The captain of the guard approached her with a respectful bow. He welcomed her warmly and began explaining the day's schedule. As he spoke, the Queen noticed that even he seemed more subdued than usual. His voice carried a certain weight, a seriousness that went beyond the normal formality of royal protocol. Behind him, more guards had gathered in a loose formation. They held various ceremonial items, some carried vintage military equipment, others held historical documents, and a few had what looked like personal mementos. The Queen's confusion grew as she tried to piece together what she was seeing. The captain continued his briefing, mentioning the various dignitaries who would be present, the media coverage planned, and the special exhibitions that had been prepared for the anniversary. But even as he spoke about the celebration, there was something in his tone that suggested this day held deeper meaning than just marking a historical milestone. Queen Camilla nodded politely as he explained the schedule, but her eyes kept drifting back to the guards. She had attended hundreds of ceremonies in her royal career, and she prided herself on understanding the importance of proper protocol and presentation. What she was witnessing here felt wrong somehow, like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together. The morning continued with the Queen being introduced to various officials and historians who had helped organize the anniversary celebration. Each person she met was professional and respectful, but that same subdued atmosphere seemed to follow everywhere they went. Even the usually energetic tour guide spoke more quietly than usual. As photographers began taking pictures and the ceremonies start time approached, Queen Camilla found herself becoming increasingly concerned about the guards' behavior. This was a moment that would be remembered in royal history, documented in newspapers, and shown on television around the world. The image of the British monarchy depended on these moments being executed flawlessly. She began to feel that familiar sense of responsibility that came with her royal position. It wasn't just about her own reputation. It was about upholding the standards and traditions that the British people expected from their royal family. The guards' apparent lack of proper military bearing was starting to feel like a reflection on the entire ceremony, and by extension on her. The Queen decided that something needed to be done. Whatever was causing this unusual atmosphere among the guards, it needed to be addressed before the main ceremony began. She couldn't allow such an important anniversary to be remembered for anything less than perfect royal protocol and military precision. Queen Camilla took a deep breath and made her decision. She couldn't let this continue any longer. The ceremony was about to begin, cameras were rolling, and hundreds of people were watching. This was supposed to be a celebration of British military tradition and royal heritage, not a casual gathering where protocol could be ignored. She spotted the captain of the guard near a group of his men who were still standing in that same relaxed manner that had been bothering her all morning. Some were chatting quietly among themselves, others seemed lost in their own thoughts, and a few were adjusting the various items they were holding. None of them looked ready for the formal ceremony that was about to take place. The Queen straightened her shoulders and walked purposefully toward the captain. Her heels clicked against the ancient cobblestones with each determined step. She had been in situations like this before, where she needed to address problems quickly and decisively. Being royal meant taking charge when others might hesitate. "Captain," she called out as she approached him. Her voice carried that particular tone she used when royal business needed immediate attention. It wasn't harsh, but it was firm enough to make it clear that this wasn't a casual conversation. The captain turned toward her immediately, sensing the seriousness in her voice. He could see from her expression that something was on her mind. In his years of service, he had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when royalty had concerns that needed to be addressed. "Your Majesty," he responded with a respectful bow, waiting to hear what she had to say. Queen Camilla glanced around at the guards once more before speaking. She wanted to make sure she was handling this situation correctly, but her instincts told her that action was needed now before things went any further. "Captain, I need to speak with you about your men," she began, keeping her voice low enough that nearby tourists and media wouldn't overhear. "I've been observing them since I arrived, and I'm quite concerned about their presentation today." The captain's eyebrows rose slightly. He hadn't expected this particular conversation, especially not right before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. "Your Majesty, is there something specific that's troubling you?" "Look at them," the Queen said, gesturing toward the group of guards. "This is one of the most important days in the history of the yeoman warders. We have international media here, tourists from around the world, and this ceremony will be remembered for generations. But your guards look like they're at a casual, social gathering rather than a formal royal event." The captain followed her gaze, looking at his men with fresh eyes. He could see what she was referring to, though from his perspective, the situation looked quite different than it apparently did to her. "Your Majesty, I can assure you that my men are fully prepared for today's ceremony," he said carefully. They understand the importance of this occasion and have been looking forward to honoring the anniversary properly. But Queen Camilla wasn't satisfied with this response. She had spent too many years in royal service to accept explanations that didn't match what she was seeing with her own eyes. "Captain, with all due respect, that's not what I'm observing," she continued, her voice becoming more insistent. "Proper military bearing is essential, especially during royal ceremonies. These guards should be standing at attention, showing the discipline and respect that this occasion demands." She paused for a moment, watching as more guards gathered in the area. Some were still carrying those mysterious items she had noticed earlier, and their conversations continued in those same hushed tones that had puzzled her all morning. "I want you to have all your guards present a formal salute immediately," she said firmly. "Right now, before the ceremony begins. They need to demonstrate proper military protocol and show the respect that this anniversary deserves." The captain felt a sudden tension in his chest. This request was putting him in an incredibly difficult position, though he couldn't explain why without revealing information that might make the situation even more complicated. "Your Majesty," he began slowly, choosing his words very carefully, "perhaps we could discuss the timing of such a demonstration. The ceremony is about to begin, and we have a very specific schedule that we've been preparing for weeks." But Queen Camilla was not in the mood for delays or negotiations. Her royal training had taught her that when protocol needed to be enforced, it should be done immediately and decisively. Waiting only made problems worse and sent the wrong message to everyone watching. "Captain, I'm not asking for a discussion," she said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that came naturally when she needed to assert her royal position. "I'm giving you a direct instruction. These guards represent the crown, and their behavior reflects on the entire royal family. I need them to show proper respect right now." The weight of her words hung in the air between them. The captain understood that he was being given a direct order from a member of the royal family, something that couldn't be ignored or postponed. In the military hierarchy that governed situations like this, the Queen's wishes took precedence over almost everything else. He looked around at his men, then back at Queen Camilla. He could see the determination in her eyes and knew that she wasn't going to accept any more explanations or delays. She had made up her mind about what needed to happen, and she expected immediate compliance. "I understand, Your Majesty," he said finally, though his voice carried a note of reluctance that the Queen couldn't quite interpret. "I'll have the men present a formal salute as you've requested." Queen Camilla nodded approvingly. This was exactly the kind of decisive action that situations like this required. She had identified a problem and taken steps to correct it before it could affect the ceremony or embarrass the royal family. "Thank you, Captain," she said, feeling satisfied that she had handled the situation properly. "Please see that it's done immediately. We can't afford to have any lapses in protocol during such an important celebration." The captain saluted her formally and turned toward his men. As he walked away to carry out her instructions, Queen Camilla felt a sense of relief. She had done her duty as a member of the royal family, ensuring that proper standards would be maintained during this historic anniversary celebration. She watched as the captain approached the guards and began speaking to them in low, urgent tones. She could see some of them glancing in her direction, and a few seemed to be asking questions that required longer explanations from their leader. The Queen straightened her jacket and prepared to watch as the guards demonstrated the kind of military precision and respect that she knew this ceremony deserved. Finally, everything would proceed according to proper royal protocol. The captain walked back toward his men with heavy steps, knowing he was about to create a situation that nobody had planned for. His mind raced as he tried to figure out the best way to handle Queen Camilla's direct order without completely disrupting what was supposed to be a very meaningful moment. As he approached the group of guards, he could see the confusion already beginning to spread across their faces. They had heard parts of his conversation with the Queen, and they could tell from his expression that something unexpected was about to happen. "Listen up, everyone," the captain said quietly, gathering his men into a closer circle. "The Queen has requested that we present a formal salute right now before the ceremony begins. The guards looked at each other with obvious bewilderment. One of the older guards, who had been holding a small wreath in his hands, tilted his head slightly and asked, "Sir, right now?" "But we're in the middle of—" "I know," the captain interrupted gently. "I know exactly what we're in the middle of. But this is a direct request from Her Majesty, and we need to comply immediately." Another guard, who was carefully holding a faded photograph, looked down at the image in his hands and then back up at his captain. "What do we do with these, sir?" "We can't exactly salute while we're holding everything." The captain rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of the impossible situation he'd been placed in. Around them, the ceremony preparations continued. Sound technicians were testing microphones, photographers were positioning themselves for the best angles, and dignitaries were taking their seats in the viewing area. "We'll have to manage as best we can," he said finally. "Try to secure whatever you're holding and present the salute as properly as possible under the circumstances." A younger guard who had been part of the tower's ceremonial team for only 2 years looked particularly confused. He was holding both a ceremonial sword and a small British flag, and he couldn't figure out how to manage both while performing a proper military salute. "Sir, this doesn't feel right," he whispered to the captain. "Shouldn't we explain what's happening?" "Maybe if the Queen understood." "The Queen has made her decision," the captain replied, though his voice carried a tone of reluctance. "Our job is to follow orders, even when the timing isn't ideal." The guards began looking around at each other, trying to figure out the logistics of what they were being asked to do. Some had ceremonial weapons, others carried historical artifacts, and several were holding personal items that had special meaning for the day's events. Near the back of the group, 2 guards were whispering to each other. One was shaking his head slowly, clearly troubled by the sudden change in plans. "This isn't how it was supposed to go," he murmured to his colleague. "We've been preparing for weeks, and now everything's getting turned upside down." The captain could see that his men were struggling with more than just the physical challenge of saluting while holding various items. There was an emotional weight to this moment that Queen Camilla clearly didn't understand, and asking them to suddenly shift into formal military mode felt jarring and inappropriate. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla stood about 30 feet away, watching the guards with satisfaction as she saw them gathering together and receiving instructions from their captain. From her perspective, this looked exactly like what should be happening: a commanding officer preparing his men to demonstrate proper military protocol. She adjusted her position slightly to get a better view of the proceedings. Several members of her royal staff had noticed the activity and were also watching with interest. One of her assistants leaned over and asked quietly, "Is this part of the planned ceremony, Your Majesty?" "No," Queen Camilla replied with a slight smile. "But it's exactly what needed to happen." These guards needed a reminder about proper military bearing during royal events. Back with the guards, the confusion was becoming more obvious by the moment. The men were trying to figure out how to arrange themselves in proper formation while dealing with all the items they were carrying. Some attempted to quickly set their belongings down on nearby benches or tables, but there wasn't enough space for everyone to do this safely. One guard tried to balance his ceremonial rifle against his shoulder while attempting to hold a small memorial flag in the same hand. Another struggled with a vintage military helmet that he had been carefully carrying as part of the historical display. The logistics were becoming increasingly complicated. "This is a mess," one of the guards muttered under his breath, though he tried to keep his voice low enough that the captain wouldn't hear him clearly. The captain could see that his men were doing their best to follow orders, but the situation was rapidly becoming more chaotic than orderly. What was supposed to be a crisp military salute was turning into an awkward juggling act as guards tried to manage their various responsibilities simultaneously. From across the courtyard, tourists and media representatives were beginning to take notice of the unusual activity. Camera phones started appearing as visitors realized that something unplanned was happening. The guards could feel the attention focusing on them, which only added to their discomfort. "Just do your best," the captain told his men, realizing that there was no perfect solution to this situation. "Present the salute as cleanly as you can, and we'll sort everything else out afterward." The guards began attempting to form some semblance of a proper military formation. Those who could manage it stood at attention, while others tried to balance their ceremonial duties with the Queen's demand for a formal salute. The result was a mixture of proper military posture and awkward improvisation. Some guards managed to secure their items well enough to present a decent salute. Others struggled visibly as they tried to maintain military bearing while preventing important ceremonial objects from falling or being damaged. A few looked toward the captain with expressions that clearly asked whether they should prioritize the salute or protecting the items they were responsible for. The older guard with the wreath found himself in a particularly difficult position. The wreath was delicate and couldn't be set down safely on the rough cobblestones, but holding it made a proper salute nearly impossible. He tried to cradle it carefully in his left arm while bringing his right hand up in salute, but the position felt awkward and unstable. Queen Camilla continued watching from her position, expecting to see the sharp, synchronized military precision that she associated with royal ceremonies. Instead, what she was witnessing looked increasingly disorganized and uncertain. The captain gave a subtle nod to his men, signaling that it was time to proceed with the salute despite all the complications. The guards straightened as much as they could manage under the circumstances and began the motion of bringing their hands up in formal military salute. But as they moved, it became clear that the combination of ceremonial objects, awkward timing, and emotional confusion was creating exactly the kind of situation that everyone had been hoping to avoid. The moment the captain gave the signal, everything began to fall apart in ways nobody could have predicted. The guards raised their hands in unison, attempting to execute the formal salute that Queen Camilla had demanded. But juggling ceremonial objects while maintaining military precision proved to be far more challenging than anyone had anticipated. The first sign of trouble came from the guard who had been struggling with the vintage military helmet. As he brought his right hand up to salute, his grip on the heavy helmet loosened. The polished metal piece began slipping from his left arm, and in his panic to catch it, he accidentally knocked into the guard standing next to him. That second guard had been carefully balancing a ceremonial replica sword across his forearm while trying to salute. The unexpected bump sent the sword sliding off his arm, and despite his desperate attempt to grab it, the metal weapon clattered loudly onto the cobblestones below. The sound of metal hitting stone rang out across the courtyard like a gunshot. The sharp clang echoed off the ancient walls of the Tower of London, creating a sound that was impossible to ignore. Tourists turned their heads toward the noise. Cameras started clicking more rapidly, and even the media representatives who had been focusing on other aspects of the ceremony began paying attention to the guards. Queen Camilla's eyes widened as she watched the sword hit the ground. This was definitely not the crisp military demonstration she had been expecting. From her position, she could see that something was going seriously wrong with what should have been a simple salute. But the falling sword was just the beginning of the chaos. Near the entrance to the White Tower, there was a ceremonial horse that had been brought in as part of the historical displays. The beautiful black mare had been standing calmly throughout the morning, accustomed to the sounds and activities of the Tower of London. However, the sudden clang of metal on stone was not a sound she was prepared for. The horse's ears shot up immediately and her eyes went wide with alarm. In her mind, the unexpected noise could mean danger, and her natural instincts kicked in immediately. The mare began to shift nervously, pulling against the decorative reins that held her in place. Her handler, who had been standing nearby chatting with one of the tour guides, turned quickly when he noticed the horse's agitation. But he wasn't fast enough to prevent what happened next. The horse reared up on her hind legs, letting out a loud whinny that could be heard throughout the entire courtyard. Her front hooves pawed at the air as she tried to get away from whatever had made that frightening noise. The sudden movement caught everyone by surprise and created an entirely new level of chaos. The sound of the horse's distress call was like a signal that sent ripples of confusion throughout the ceremony area. Guards who had been trying to maintain their salute positions suddenly found themselves looking around to see what was happening. Some broke formation entirely, while others tried to maintain military bearing despite the obvious crisis developing around them near the horse. Tourists began backing away quickly. Parents grabbed their children and moved toward what they thought might be safer areas. The professional photographers, on the other hand, saw an unexpected photo opportunity and began snapping pictures as fast as their cameras would allow. One of the guards who had been closest to the horse when she reared up instinctively moved to help. But in his rush to assist, he forgot that he was still holding the delicate wreath that had been part of the ceremony. As he stepped forward quickly, the wreath caught on a decorative rope barrier and was pulled from his hands. The wreath tumbled to the ground, and some of the flowers scattered across the cobblestones. The guard stopped in his tracks, looking down at the damaged arrangement with obvious distress. This wasn't just any wreath. It had special meaning for the day's events, and seeing it damaged added another layer of problems to an already complicated situation. Meanwhile, other guards were still trying to complete their salute while dealing with their own challenges. One man attempted to maintain his military posture while his ceremonial flag began unfolding in the breeze, making it nearly impossible to manage. Another struggled as his grip on a historical artifact became increasingly uncertain. The captain found himself in the middle of a situation that was spiraling out of control faster than he could manage. He had guards dealing with dropped items, a panicked horse, scattered flowers, confused tourists, and clicking cameras. All of this was happening while Queen Camilla watched from across the courtyard, clearly expecting some kind of resolution. The horse's handler was doing his best to calm the mare, speaking to her in soothing tones and trying to get her back down on all four legs. But horses don't calm down instantly, and she continued to prance nervously, still spooked by the original noise and now agitated by all the additional commotion around her. "Easy, girl, easy," the handler kept repeating, but his own voice carried a note of stress that the horse could definitely sense. Animals are incredibly good at picking up on human emotions, and the handler's anxiety was only making the situation more difficult. Some of the guards had completely abandoned their attempt at saluting, and were now trying to help manage the various crises that had developed. One bent down to gather the scattered flowers from the damaged wreath. Another moved to retrieve the fallen sword, being careful not to make any additional noise that might further upset the horse. The guard who had originally dropped the sword looked absolutely mortified. In all his years of ceremonial duty, he had never experienced anything like this. Military training teaches you to handle equipment with precision and care, and having a ceremonial weapon clatter to the ground during a royal event felt like a personal failure. Queen Camilla stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what she was witnessing. What had started as a simple request for proper military protocol had somehow transformed into a scene that looked more like controlled chaos than a dignified royal ceremony. The sounds continued to echo around the courtyard. The horses continued whinnying. The scraping of metal as the sword was picked up, the voices of tourists asking each other what was happening, and the rapid clicking of camera shutters capturing every moment of the unfolding drama. Media representatives who had come to cover a routine anniversary celebration suddenly found themselves documenting something much more unexpected. News cameras that had been set up to record formal speeches and traditional ceremonies were now capturing a very different kind of story. The captain realized that he needed to take control of the situation quickly before things got even worse. But with so many different problems happening simultaneously, it was difficult to know where to focus his attention first. Should he help with the horse, organize his men, address the Queen's concerns, or try to minimize the media attention that was now focused on their mishap? As he looked around at the chaos that had developed from what should have been a simple salute, the captain couldn't help but think that this was exactly the kind of situation he had been hoping to avoid when Queen Camilla first made her request. The chaos that had started with a simple dropped sword was now impossible to ignore. What had begun as a private moment between Queen Camilla and the guards had transformed into a very public spectacle that was drawing attention from every corner of the Tower of London, tourists who had been quietly exploring the historic grounds suddenly found themselves witnessing something far more dramatic than they had expected from their visit. The sound of the horses' continued distress calls, combined with the guards scrambling to manage the situation, created an energy that was impossible to miss. Camera phones appeared everywhere as visitors realized they were seeing something unusual. Within seconds, dozens of people were recording videos and taking pictures of the unfolding scene. The age of social media meant that moments like this could be shared around the world in minutes, and many tourists understood they were capturing something that might become famous. One family from Australia had been taking a casual selfie near the White Tower when the commotion began. The father quickly switched his phone to video mode and started recording, whispering to his wife, "You're not going to believe this when we show people back home." A group of students on a school trip from Scotland had been listening to their teacher explain the history of the yeoman warders when the horse reared up. Now they were all pointing and talking excitedly, with several of them capturing the scene on their phones despite their teacher's attempts to keep them focused on the educational aspects of their visit. Near the gift shop, a couple celebrating their anniversary had been posed for a romantic photo with the tower's ancient walls in the background. But now their photographer was more interested in capturing the unexpected drama happening just a few yards away from them. The professional media representatives who had come to cover the anniversary celebration were having a field day. This was exactly the kind of unexpected human interest story that news outlets loved. Formal royal ceremonies happened all the time, but moments like this were rare and valuable. A reporter from the BBC quickly repositioned herself to get a better angle on the scene. She began speaking rapidly into her microphone, providing live commentary for viewers who were watching the ceremony coverage from home. "What we're witnessing here is definitely not part of the planned anniversary celebration," she said, trying to maintain her professional composure while clearly excited about the developing story. A photographer from one of the major London newspapers was clicking away rapidly, knowing that these images would likely end up on front pages if the story gained enough attention. Royal mishaps were always newsworthy, especially when they involved such dramatic elements as panicked horses and scattered ceremonial objects. The guards themselves were becoming increasingly aware of all the attention focused on them. Military training teaches you to maintain composure under pressure, but being the center of a media circus while trying to manage multiple crises was testing their abilities to stay calm and professional. One of the younger guards, who was still relatively new to ceremonial duties, looked around at all the cameras and felt his anxiety spike even higher. He had joined the yeoman warders because he loved history and wanted to be part of preserving British traditions. Having his mistakes documented and potentially broadcast around the world was not something he had prepared for. The captain could see that the media attention was making his men even more nervous, which was only making the situation more difficult to control. Guards who might have been able to handle the practical problems were now also dealing with the stress of performing under intense scrutiny. "Try to ignore the cameras," he called out to his men, though he knew this was easier said than done. "Focus on getting everything back under control." But the cameras were impossible to ignore. Flash photography was creating additional visual chaos, and the constant clicking and whirring of camera equipment was adding to the noise level in an area that was already filled with too much commotion. Queen Camilla stood in the middle of all this attention, realizing that her simple request for a proper salute had somehow created a situation that was now being documented by dozens of people. Her years of royal training had taught her how to handle media attention during planned events, but this was something entirely different. She could see reporters speaking into their microphones and cameras pointed in her direction. Royal protocol experts would later analyze every aspect of her response to this situation, and she knew that how she handled the next few minutes could affect public perception of the royal family. One of her personal assistants approached her carefully and said quietly, "Your Majesty, perhaps we should consider moving to a different area until this situation is resolved." But Queen Camilla knew that leaving now would only make things worse. Walking away from a problem, especially one that she had inadvertently created, would send the wrong message to everyone watching. Royal duty meant staying and dealing with difficult situations, not avoiding them. No, she replied firmly. We stay and see this through properly. Near the horse, the situation was slowly improving, but very slowly. The handler had managed to get the mare back down on all four legs, but she was still nervous and jumpy. Every sudden sound or movement made her ears prick up and her muscles tense, ready to react again. The crowd of onlookers was making the horse's recovery more difficult. Horses are naturally social animals, but they're also prey animals that can be easily overwhelmed by too much activity around them. Having dozens of people watching, talking, and taking pictures was not helping her calm down. Several guards had formed a loose barrier around the horse area, trying to give the handler more space to work. But they were also dealing with their own responsibilities, recovering dropped items, maintaining some semblance of ceremony protocol, and managing their own stress levels while being watched by so many people, the wreath that had been damaged. When it fell was now being carefully examined by one of the guards. Some of the flowers could be salvaged, but others were clearly beyond repair. He tried to arrange what remained into something that might still be presentable, but it was obvious that the original beautiful arrangement was gone. Social media was already beginning to buzz with posts about the incident. Hashtags like #RoyalFail and #TowerChaos were starting to appear as people shared their photos and videos online. Within the hour, millions of people around the world would be seeing clips of what had happened at the Tower of London. Tour guides throughout the tower were being approached by curious visitors who had heard the commotion and wanted to know what was happening. The guides found themselves in the awkward position of trying to explain a situation that they didn't fully understand themselves. "Is this part of the show?" one tourist asked her guide. "No, this is definitely not planned," the guide replied, though she was privately thinking that it was certainly more exciting than the usual historical presentations. The ceremony's official schedule was now completely disrupted. Dignitaries who had arrived for the anniversary celebration were standing around uncertainly, unsure whether they should proceed with their planned roles or wait for the current crisis to be resolved. Queen Camilla looked around at all the chaos that had developed from her simple request and began to realize that perhaps there was more to this situation than she had initially understood. As the chaos slowly began to settle around them, the captain of the guard realized he could no longer avoid the conversation he had been dreading all morning. The horse was finally calming down, the dropped items had been recovered, and the immediate crisis was under control. But Queen Camilla was still standing there, clearly confused and concerned about what had just happened. The captain took a deep breath and walked toward her with careful, measured steps. His face carried an expression that was both respectful and deeply troubled. He had served in many difficult situations during his military career, but having to explain this particular misunderstanding to a member of the royal family felt especially challenging. Queen Camilla saw him approaching and straightened herself, preparing for what she assumed would be an explanation about the guard's lack of preparedness, or perhaps an apology for the mishap that had just occurred. She expected him to take responsibility for the chaos and assure her that better training would prevent such incidents in the future. "Your Majesty," the captain began, his voice quieter than usual, "I need to explain what was happening when you arrived this morning. I should have clarified the situation earlier, but I was hoping we could manage both your request and our planned activities without any problems." Queen Camilla nodded, waiting to hear his explanation. Around them, guards were still recovering from the incident, and she could see media representatives positioning themselves to potentially overhear this conversation. The captain noticed this too and gestured slightly toward a more private area. "Perhaps we could speak more privately, Your Majesty," he suggested. They moved a few steps away from the main crowd. Though the attention of cameras and curious onlookers followed them, Queen Camilla was becoming increasingly puzzled about why this conversation required such privacy. Military discipline issues were usually straightforward matters that didn't need secretive discussions. "Your Majesty," the captain continued, "when you arrived this morning and observed the guards, they weren't being casual or disrespectful. They were actually participating in a very specific part of today's ceremony that had been planned for many weeks. The Queen's eyebrows raised slightly. This wasn't the explanation she had been expecting. What kind of specific activity requires such relaxed military bearing during a royal visit? The captain looked down for a moment, gathering his thoughts before continuing. This was the part of the explanation that he knew would be difficult for everyone involved. Your Majesty, today's anniversary celebration included a special memorial service for the yeoman warders who have died in service over the past 5 years. When you arrived, the guards were observing a moment of silent reflection in honor of their fallen colleagues. The words hung in the air between them like a heavy weight. Queen Camilla felt something shift in her understanding of the morning's events, though she wasn't yet fully grasping the complete picture of what the captain was telling her. A memorial service? She repeated slowly. Yes, Your Majesty. Each of the guards was carrying something related to the men we've lost. Some had photographs, others carried personal mementos that had belonged to their colleagues, and several were holding memorial wreaths or flags that we planned to use in the ceremony. As the captain spoke, Queen Camilla began to remember the items she had seen the guards holding all morning. The photographs, the wreaths, the small flags, suddenly they took on a completely different meaning than what she had originally assumed. The guard who was holding the wreath, she said quietly, the one that was damaged when it fell ... That was made specifically to honor his partner, who died in a car accident last year while off duty, the captain explained gently. They had worked together for 8 years. The flowers were chosen because they were his colleagues' favorites. Queen Camilla felt her chest tighten as the reality of the situation began to sink in. The relaxed posture she had interpreted as disrespectful had actually been the natural stance of people lost in memories of their departed friends and colleagues. And the guard with the photograph? She asked, though she was beginning to fear the answer. That was a picture of the ceremony when he and his best friend graduated from training together. His friend died of cancer 6 months ago. He was carrying it because he wanted his colleague to be part of today's celebration, even though he couldn't be here physically. The captain could see the understanding dawning in Queen Camilla's eyes, and he knew that the next part of his explanation would be even more difficult. Your Majesty, when you requested the formal salute, we were actually in the middle of a 2-minute silence that had been scheduled to honor all the guards we've lost. That's why my men seemed so subdued and reflective. They weren't being disrespectful. They were paying their respects to fallen colleagues. Queen Camilla felt the blood drain from her face as she fully understood what had happened. Her insistence on proper military protocol had interrupted a sacred moment of remembrance. Her demand for a salute had forced guards to choose between following her orders and maintaining the dignity of a memorial service. The items they were carrying, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, they weren't just ceremonial objects for the anniversary celebration. No, Your Majesty, each item had personal significance. The vintage helmet belonged to a guard who served for 30 years before passing away from heart disease. The ceremonial sword was carried by a young guard who died in a training accident. The families had loaned these items specifically for today's memorial. The weight of her mistake was becoming overwhelming. Queen Camilla realized that her interpretation of the guard's behavior had been completely wrong. What she had seen as a lack of proper respect had actually been the deepest form of respect possible, men honoring their fallen brothers in arms. The sword that fell, she asked, dreading the answer. It belonged to a guard who died saving a tourist who had fallen into the Thames near the tower. He was awarded a medal for bravery posthumously. His widow specifically asked that we include his ceremonial sword in today's memorial. Queen Camilla closed her eyes for a moment, trying to process the full scope of what had happened. Her demand for protocol had led to the very sword of a hero being dropped and potentially damaged. The irony was painful and humbling. The captain continued gently. Your Majesty, my men understand that you were following royal protocol as you understood the situation. They don't blame you for what happened. But I thought you should know the full context of this morning's events. Around them, the ceremony area was slowly returning to some semblance of order, but Queen Camilla now understood that the damage went far beyond dropped objects and frightened horses. She had unknowingly disrupted something sacred, something that meant everything to these men who had lost colleagues and friends. "How many guards have we lost in the past 5 years?" she asked quietly. "7, Your Majesty. 7 good men who served with honor and dedication." Today was supposed to be about celebrating the long history of the yeoman warders, but also about making sure these recent losses weren't forgotten. The full picture was now crystal clear to Queen Camilla, and the realization of her mistake hit her with a force that took her breath away. The full weight of what had happened crashed over Queen Camilla like a wave. As the captain's words sank in completely, she felt a heat rising from her chest up through her neck and into her face. The realization that she had interrupted a sacred memorial service, that she had forced grieving men to abandon their moment of reflection for their fallen colleagues, was almost too much to bear. Her face began to flush a deep red color that started at her cheeks and spread outward. Anyone watching could see the embarrassment washing over her features as she understood the magnitude of her mistake. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding about military protocol. This was a profound error in judgment that had caused real pain to people who were already dealing with loss. Queen Camilla looked around at the guards who were still recovering from the chaos that had erupted from her demand. Each man she saw now took on a different meaning. That guard carefully examining the damaged wreath wasn't just dealing with a ceremonial mishap. He was trying to salvage something precious that honored his dead partner. The young guard who had dropped the sword wasn't just clumsy, he had been forced to risk damaging a hero's memorial. The heat in her face intensified as she thought about how she had stood there, satisfied with herself for enforcing proper protocol, while these men struggled to balance her orders with their desire to honor their fallen colleagues. She had been proud of taking charge and ensuring royal standards were maintained completely, oblivious to the sacred nature of what she was disrupting. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to the captain standing beside her. "What have I done?" The captain saw the distress in her expression and felt genuine sympathy for her situation. He had served long enough to understand that even well-intentioned people could make serious mistakes when they didn't have all the information. But he also knew that his men were watching this conversation and wondering how their queen would respond to learning the truth. Queen Camilla's mind raced through everything that had happened since her arrival. She remembered feeling annoyed by the guards' relaxed demeanor, frustrated by what she perceived as a lack of proper military bearing. She had been so focused on maintaining royal protocol that she had completely missed the emotional significance of what was actually taking place. The embarrassment deepened as she realized how many people had witnessed her mistake. The tourists, with their cameras, the media representatives who had been documenting everything, the dignitaries who had come for the anniversary celebration, they had all seen her demand. A salute that disrupted a memorial service for fallen heroes, she thought. About the guard who had been wiping his eye when she first arrived. That hadn't been casual behavior or a lack of discipline, that had been genuine grief for a lost colleague. The whispered conversations she had observed weren't unprofessional chatter, they were men sharing memories and supporting each other through their loss. "The families," she said suddenly, a new wave of horror washing over her. "Are there family members here today? Widows, children, parents of the men who died?" The captain nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Majesty. Several families traveled to be here for the memorial portion of the ceremony. They're seated in the special viewing area near the chapel." Queen Camilla's embarrassment reached a new level as she realized that family members of the deceased guards had witnessed the entire spectacle. They had come to honor their loved ones and instead had seen their memorial items scattered and damaged. Because of her misunderstanding, she could feel eyes on her from every direction. Media cameras that had been recording the ceremony were still pointed in her direction, capturing every moment of her realization and embarrassment. Royal protocol demanded that she maintain her composure in public, but the weight of her mistake was making that increasingly difficult. The red flush in her face was now clearly visible to anyone looking at her. Years of royal training had taught her how to handle many different types of public situations, but dealing with such a personal and profound error in front of so many witnesses was something she had never prepared for. "I need to make this right," she said to the captain, her voice stronger now despite her obvious distress. "But I don't even know where to begin. How do you apologize for something like this?" The captain appreciated her desire to fix the situation, but he also understood that some damage couldn't be easily repaired. The moment of silent reflection had been broken, ceremonial items had been damaged, and the entire memorial service would now be remembered for the chaos rather than the dignity that had been planned. Queen Camilla thought about all the times she had criticized others for not understanding proper protocol or royal expectations. She had prided herself on her knowledge of etiquette and her ability to maintain standards in any situation. Now she was the one who had failed to understand what was really happening around her. The irony was particularly painful. She had been so concerned about maintaining respect and dignity during the ceremony that she had inadvertently caused the exact opposite. Her attempt to enforce proper military bearing had led to damaged memorial items, frightened animals, and scattered flowers. That had been carefully chosen to honor the dead. She could imagine the headlines that would appear in tomorrow's newspapers. Queen Camilla disrupts memorial service. Royal protocol gone wrong at Tower of London. Guards forced to choose between Queen's orders and honoring fallen colleagues. Each potential headline made her face burn with shame. The guards themselves were being remarkably gracious about the situation, but Queen Camilla could see the disappointment in some of their faces. These were men who had lost friends and colleagues, who had planned this memorial service with care and love, and who had been looking forward to a dignified moment of remembrance. Instead, their memorial had become a spectacle that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. Social media posts about the incident were probably already spreading around the world, turning their private grief into public entertainment. Queen Camilla realized that her embarrassment, while genuine and painful, was nothing compared to what these men were feeling. They had been forced to watch memorial items honoring their dead colleagues get damaged and scattered while cameras recorded everything. Their moment of peace and reflection had been replaced by chaos and confusion. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders. As a member of the royal family, she was supposed to be someone who honored service and sacrifice, who understood the importance of military tradition and the bonds between soldiers. Instead, she had demonstrated a complete failure to recognize the most basic elements of military brotherhood and remembrance. She thought about the young guard, who had carried his friend's photograph, forced to risk dropping it while attempting to salute on her command. She thought about the man who had tried to protect the wreath honoring his partner, only to watch it fall and scatter its flowers across the cold stone. Every detail of her mistake seemed to make the embarrassment worse. The heat in her face wasn't going away, and she knew that her red cheeks were probably visible in every photograph being taken. But more than her personal embarrassment, she was devastated by the realization that her actions had caused pain to people who were already suffering from loss. Standing there in the courtyard of the Tower of London, surrounded by the evidence of her mistake and watched by cameras from around the world, Queen Camilla had never felt more humbled or more determined to find a way to make things right. Queen Camilla stood silent for a long moment, the weight of her mistake heavy on her shoulders. But as she looked around at the guards, the scattered memorial items, and the watching crowd, something shifted inside her. The embarrassment was still there, burning in her cheeks, but it was being replaced by something stronger, a determination to turn this terrible mistake into something meaningful. She had spent her entire royal career learning that true leadership wasn't about never making mistakes. It was about how you responded when things went wrong. And right now, these guards and their fallen colleagues deserve better than just an embarrassed queen standing frozen by her own shame. "Captain," she said, her voice growing steadier with each word, "I want to start over. All of this, the ceremony, the memorial, everything. We're going to do this properly." The captain looked at her with surprise. He had expected an apology, perhaps some attempt to quietly move past the incident. But Queen Camilla's suggestion was something entirely different and much more significant. "Your Majesty, the schedule, the media, the other dignitaries, .. He began, but she raised her hand gently to stop him. "The schedule can wait. The media can record something worth recording. And the dignitaries can learn what real honor looks like," she said firmly. "Those 7 men who died in service deserve better than what just happened here. Their families deserve better, and these guards deserve the chance to honor their colleagues properly." She turned toward the area where the ceremony had been planned to take place. The stage was still set up, the microphones were still working, and the viewing area was still filled with people who had come to witness the anniversary celebration. But now Queen Camilla had a different vision for how this day should unfold. "I want to address everyone," she told the captain. "The guards, the families, the dignitaries, the media, everyone. And then I want us to hold the memorial service exactly as you had planned it, with the dignity and respect it deserves." The captain felt a surge of respect for Queen Camilla that he hadn't expected. Many people in positions of power would have tried to minimize their mistakes or shift blame to others, but she was choosing to acknowledge her error publicly and use her royal platform to honor the men who had been forgotten in the chaos. "Are you certain, Your Majesty? This will mean admitting the mistake in front of everyone, including the international media." Queen Camilla's face was still red with embarrassment, but her voice was strong and determined. "Captain, those 7 guards died serving their country and protecting the people who visit this historic place. The least I can do is swallow my pride and make sure they get the honor they deserve." Word quickly spread through the ceremony area that Queen Camilla wanted to address the crowd. Guards moved efficiently to ensure the sound system was working properly, while dignitaries took their seats and media representatives positioned their cameras for what they sensed would be an important moment. The families of the fallen guards, who had been watching the earlier chaos with confusion and sadness, looked toward the stage with uncertainty. They had come expecting a simple memorial within the larger anniversary celebration, but now something much more significant seemed to be happening. Queen Camilla walked to the microphone with steady steps, though those close to her could still see the emotion in her face. The crowd fell silent as she prepared to speak, sensing that whatever was about to happen was not part of the original ceremony schedule. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "I need to speak with you about what happened here this morning and about why we're all really gathered here today." She paused for a moment, looking out at the faces in the crowd, tourists who had expected a simple sightseeing visit, media representatives who had come to cover a routine royal event, and most importantly, the families who had come to honor their lost loved ones. "When I arrived this morning, I made a serious mistake. I saw the guards of the Tower of London standing quietly, holding personal items, and I misunderstood what I was witnessing. I thought I was seeing a lack of proper military protocol. In reality, I was witnessing something far more important. Men honoring their fallen colleagues with silent respect and remembrance." A murmur went through the crowd as people began to understand what she was saying. The media representatives realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A member of the royal family publicly admitting a significant mistake and taking full responsibility for it. In my concern for maintaining proper ceremony, I inadvertently disrupted a memorial service for 7 brave guards who died while serving their country and community. These men weren't just soldiers, they were friends, colleagues, partners, and family members to the people standing here today. Queen Camilla's voice grew stronger as she continued. The items that were damaged in the confusion that followed: a memorial wreath, a hero's ceremonial sword, personal photographs. These weren't just ceremonial objects. They were precious reminders of men who gave their lives in service to others. She turned toward the families who were seated in the special viewing area. "To the families of these fallen guards, I offer my deepest apologies. You came here today to honor your loved ones, and instead you witnessed chaos and confusion. That was never what they deserved, and it's not what you deserved." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Even the tourists who had been taking pictures had lowered their cameras, sensing the gravity of the moment. "But we're going to do better," Queen Camilla continued. "Right now, today, we're going to hold the memorial service that these 7 heroes should have had. We're going to speak their names, honor their service, and ensure that their sacrifice is remembered properly." She gestured toward the guards who were standing nearby, many of them still holding the memorial items they had been carrying all morning. "I want to invite the captain of the guard to tell us about each of these men. I want their colleagues to share memories. I want their families to know that their sacrifice matters and will be remembered." The captain stepped forward, clearly moved by Queen Camilla's words. He had served in many ceremonies during his career, but he had never seen a member of the royal family take such personal responsibility for a mistake, and then use their position to create something meaningful from it. "Your Majesty," he said, "it would be an honor." What followed was unlike any royal ceremony that had ever been held at the Tower of London. One by one, the captain spoke about each of the 7 guards who had died. He told their stories: the veteran who had served for 30 years before his heart gave out, the young guard who died in a training accident, the hero who drowned saving a tourist, the man who lost his battle with cancer. As each name was spoken, guards came forward with the memorial items they had been carrying. The damaged wreath was presented with dignity despite its scattered flowers. The ceremonial sword was held high with respect despite its fall. Photographs were shared, showing the men in happier times with their colleagues. Family members were invited to speak if they wished. A widow talked about her husband's love for the tower and its history. A mother shared memories of her son's pride in becoming a yeoman warder. A daughter read a letter her father had written about the honor of serving alongside such dedicated men. The ceremony that emerged from Queen Camilla's mistake became more powerful and meaningful than anything that had been originally planned. The international media coverage that had started as documentation of a royal mishap transformed into a story about honor, respect, and the importance of remembering those who served. By the time the memorial service concluded, Queen Camilla had learned something invaluable about leadership, humility, and the power of admitting mistakes. The guards had received the recognition their fallen colleagues deserved, and the families had experienced something far more meaningful than a simple commemoration. They had witnessed their loved ones honored by a queen who cared enough to set aside her own embarrassment to do what was right. The day that had started with confusion and chaos ended with dignity, respect, and a deeper understanding of what true service really means.